70,000 years ago, the Earth itself seemed to turn against its own children. Volcanic eruptions in distant lands darkened the sky, sending a thick veil of ash across continents. The sun disappeared for months, leaving the world in a frozen twilight. Crops failed, rivers froze, and the animals humans relied upon vanished or became lethal predators. Starving and desperate, in one isolated tribe, the air was thick with the stench of hunger and fear. Many had already succumbed to starvation. Fires went out in the bitter cold, and each attempt to hunt brought more danger than food. Some nights, the howls of giant wolves echoed across the plains, reminding the survivors that they were no longer the dominant species. For the first time in history, humanity faced extinction, not gradually, but as a sudden, terrifying collapse. Entire populations dwindled to mere thousands. Every decision, every step, every meal could mean the difference between life and death. Survival was no longer guaranteed. In that shadow of ash and ice, the human race teetered on the edge of oblivion. 70,000 years ago, the Earth was entering one of the coldest periods in its history. Vast sheets of ice stretched across northern continents, crushing forests and plains beneath frozen layers. Snow-blanketed regions that had once been fertile and rivers that had carried life for millennia were now frozen solid. The sky was often a dull gray, heavy with ash blown from supervolcanic eruptions thousands of miles away, leaving sunlight weak and distant. Crops and edible plants, if they survived at all, were rare, brittle, and insufficient to feed even small tribes. Wild animals had either migrated to warmer lands or adapted to the harsh conditions. Predators became more desperate and dangerous, often striking closer to human settlements. Giant wolves, saber-tooth cats, and cave bears roamed the frozen landscape, scavenging wherever they could find sustenance. Herds of mammoths and bison, once abundant, were dwindling, leaving humans with fewer hunting opportunities and greater risk whenever they attempted to hunt. Humans themselves were scattered in small, fragile groups, moving constantly in search of food, shelter, and safety. Tools were rudimentary. Fire was difficult to maintain in the biting cold, and clothing could barely protect against frostbite during the long, dark nights. Tribes had to navigate a world where every choice carried lethal consequences: which path to follow across treacherous ice, which river to attempt to cross, whether to face a predator for a chance at a meal. Occasionally, nights brought moments of terrifying intimacy with death. You imagine standing beside a fragile fire as snow swirls around you, knowing that one misstep, one failed hunt, or one misjudged threat from a predator could mean the end, not just for you, but for your entire group. The very forces of nature seemed aligned against survival, and humanity teetered on a knife's edge. In this frozen, ash-choked world, life was not just fragile. It was a battle fought every single day. The landscape itself tested human endurance and ingenuity. And yet, even here, in the shadow of extinction, early humans began to adapt, innovate, and persevere, laying the foundations for survival against unimaginable odds. As the frozen months dragged on, the reality of survival became unbearably clear. Food was no longer just scarce. It was nearly impossible to find. Small animals had disappeared. Plant life had withered beneath layers of frost and ash, and the few remaining herds of mammoths or bison were either dangerously far away or fiercely guarded by predators. Every hunt was a gamble, every journey across the icy plains a test of skill and luck. Water, once a reliable source of life, was trapped in ice or contaminated by ash from distant volcanic eruptions. The rivers that had guided humans for generations were now treacherous, their frozen surfaces hiding deadly currents beneath. Fires, essential for warmth and cooking, were difficult to maintain in the biting wind. The simplest tasks, lighting a flame, keeping the family warm, tracking a deer, had become matters of life or death. Even predators were no longer predictable. Dire wolves hunted in packs that seemed to anticipate human movements. Saber-tooth cats, silent and relentless, prowled the night. Cave bears, massive and territorial, invaded human shelters when hunger drove them from the wilderness. Tribes had to remain vigilant every waking hour, knowing that a single mistake could mean death, not just for one individual, but for the entire group. Occasionally, you can imagine yourself crouched behind a snow-covered boulder, teeth chattering, watching a pack of wolves circling your camp. Every sound, the cracking of ice, the howl of a predator, the moan of the wind carries a threat. Hunger gnaws at your belly, frost bites your fingers, and yet you must move, hunt, and survive because doing nothing guarantees death. And yet, this was only the beginning. The true crisis was far larger than any one tribe could manage. Volcanic ash in the atmosphere had plunged global temperatures. Food shortages were widespread. Entire human populations were collapsing. Anthropologists estimate that during this period, humanity may have dwindled to only a few thousand individuals worldwide. Every human alive was part of a precarious thread connecting life to extinction. And one catastrophic event, a failed hunt, a harsh winter, or an encounter with a predator could snap it entirely. In this frozen, merciless world, survival was no longer about comfort or safety. It was about endurance against overwhelming odds. Humanity teetered on the brink, and only those who could adapt, endure, and innovate would live to see another sunrise. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of cold, hunger, and fear. Every dawn brought the same questions: where to find food, how to avoid the predators that prowled nearby, and how to keep the fire alive long enough to warm the tribe's meager shelter. The wind carried a biting chill, stripping warmth from exposed skin in seconds. Snowdrifts piled high against primitive huts, crushing the fragile structures or forcing the survivors to dig their way out each morning. Hunting had become an exercise in desperation. The great herds of bison and mammoths, which had once allowed humans to secure enough food for weeks, had thinned drastically. When a lone animal appeared in the distance, the hunters had to weigh the risks, crossing frozen rivers with hidden currents, navigating ice-coated cliffs, or braving the territory of predators that smelled weakness as easily as prey. One wrong step could mean a fall into icy waters, a broken leg, and a slow death in the cold. Predators were not passive threats. Dire wolves stalked silently in the twilight, their glowing eyes tracking movement across the snow. Saber-tooth cats, almost ghostly in the dim light, could ambush without warning, their massive jaws capable of tearing through the strongest human defenses. Cave bears, huge and unpredictable, invaded sleeping areas when hunger forced them closer to human settlements. Survival required constant vigilance, every sense attuned to danger. Hunters would communicate with signals, gestures, and whispers, but even the most cautious group could be ambushed in a heartbeat. Food shortages pushed humans to extremes. Roots and frozen berries provided little nourishment, and small animals were hunted with rudimentary tools, spears chipped from flint, traps fashioned from bone and sinew. Families scavenged tirelessly, sometimes traveling miles in sub-zero temperatures, their bodies weakening with each day. Starvation became a specter hovering over the tribe. Occasionally, you can imagine the pangs of hunger, your stomach twisting as your fingers numb from frostbite, forcing you to press onward, knowing that stopping is not an option. Water was no easier to secure. Rivers and streams, once flowing freely, were now frozen or tainted with volcanic ash. Melting snow over a fire became a ritual of survival, but the effort expended in collecting it often left the humans more exhausted than hydrated. Illness spread quickly in such conditions. Frostbite, hypothermia, and infection claimed more lives than predators. Invisible but relentless, the nights brought their own terror. Darkness was not just absence of light, it was a predator, a test of endurance. The wind howled across the plains, rattling fragile shelters and carrying the faint cries of animals hunting for the same scarce resources. Fires were maintained at all costs, and those who ventured out into the night for hunting or gathering had to move silently, every step calculated to avoid alerting both human and animal predators. Survival required constant ingenuity. Humans experimented with new ways to trap animals, reinforced their shelters against the snow and predators, and learned to ration every scrap of food. They shared knowledge, often under dire circumstances, understanding that cooperation could mean the difference between life and death. Some tribes discovered methods of preserving food, storing fat or dried meat, for days when hunting failed. Others learned to build barriers or dig pits to protect against predators or sudden snowstorms. Yet, despite all efforts, death was never far away. Every day, the tribe lost members, some to hunger, some to predators, some to the unforgiving cold. The loss of a single hunter meant the rest of the group faced even greater peril. Grief was compounded by fear, but survival demanded action, not despair. Each decision, whether to hunt, flee, or fortify, was made under the shadow of mortality. And through all this, humanity endured. Every successful hunt, every night survived by the fire, and every clever adaptation strengthened the fragile thread of existence. The struggle was unrelenting, terrifying, and exhausting. But it was within this crucible of frost and hunger, shadowed by predator and ash, that early humans honed the skills and resilience that would allow the species not just to survive, but to endure across millennia. Then came the days that would test humanity as never before. The ash-thickened sky blocked what little warmth the sun could provide. Temperatures plummeted, colder than any living memory. Fires that had been tended through long nights flickered and died, leaving families shivering in darkness. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, sharper than any predator's teeth, while the weakest members of the tribe succumbed to frostbite and malnutrition. Predators, emboldened by desperation, became more daring. Dire wolves attacked not just on the periphery but right at the edges of human camps. Saber-tooth cats, sensing weakness, lurked silently among snowdrifts, their massive forms moving like shadows that could crush hope with a single pounce. Even the colossal cave bears, usually solitary, began encroaching on the human shelters in search of food. Survival no longer felt possible. Every step outside the fragile fires of the camp could be your last. Some tribes attempted to migrate, but the frozen rivers and jagged cliffs made escape a gamble. Children and the elderly struggled to keep pace. Every mile was a battlefield against nature itself. Entire families were lost to blizzards or hidden crevasses, swallowed by the ice that had become an unforgiving predator of its own. Humanity, already dwindling, seemed poised to vanish entirely from the planet. In the darkest moments, despair hung heavier than the ash in the air. One wrong decision, a failed hunt, a misjudged river crossing, a fire that went out could wipe out generations in an instant. The fragile thread connecting life to extinction felt as if it would snap at any moment. And yet, even in this relentless, merciless winter, a flicker of ingenuity and determination endured. Humans were pushed beyond their limits, forced to innovate, to fight, and to cling to life with every ounce of strength they had left. The world had become almost unrecognizable. It was no longer a place of survival. It was a crucible designed to test whether humanity itself could persist. And in that moment, teetering on the edge of annihilation, every heartbeat, every breath, every decision carried the weight of an entire species. Amid the relentless cold and near starvation, early humans began to show the resilience that would define the species for millennia. Fire became more than warmth. It was a lifeline. Tribes learned to shield flames from the biting wind with rock and wood barriers, ensuring they could cook scarce food and stave off frostbite during the long nights. Even a small ember now held the power to save lives. Hunting strategies evolved. Groups coordinated like never before, using signals, traps, and clever tactics to corner prey too large or too dangerous to approach recklessly. Mammoths, once terrifying behemoths, were hunted not alone but as a team, leveraging terrain, pitfalls, and fire to turn the hunt in their favor. Survival demanded creativity, and humanity adapted, turning desperation into innovation. Shelters were fortified against predators, caves were barricaded, wooden spikes erected around camps, and watch posts maintained to alert the group of approaching threats. Even the youngest and weakest members contributed, learning from elders how to spot danger and manage resources efficiently. Cooperation became the greatest weapon against extinction. Water collection, once a simple task, became a daily ritual of precision. Snow and ice were melted over protected fires, filtered with cloth and sand, and rationed carefully. Every drop counted, every method refined through trial and error. These small victories, keeping a fire alive, trapping a single animal, surviving a blizzard gradually built confidence and reinforced hope. It was not an easy victory. Death still stalked the tribe and hunger never fully disappeared. Yet for the first time in generations, survival seemed possible. Humans had adapted not through sheer strength alone, but through ingenuity, cooperation, and perseverance. In the shadow of near extinction, they discovered that the greatest tools for survival were their minds, their unity, and their will to endure. In this frozen, ash-choked world, humans had begun to reclaim their place, proving that even when the odds are stacked against them, life finds a way. The thread of humanity, once perilously thin, had begun to strengthen, carrying the species forward into an uncertain, yet survivable, future. The storm of ash and ice eventually passed, but the memory of those dark months remained etched into the bones of humanity. Tribes that survived the near-extinction event carried forward lessons that would shape the species for generations. The importance of cooperation, ingenuity, and the relentless will to endure. Fire, shelters, and teamwork were no longer just tools, they were lifelines, proving that even in the harshest conditions, human survival depended on intelligence as much as strength. Those who lived passed on knowledge through stories, rituals, and practices, embedding survival wisdom into the culture itself. Each ember saved, each trap perfected, and each daring hunt became part of a legacy that would allow humans to thrive in increasingly challenging environments. Humanity had been tested, forced to confront the fragile line between existence and oblivion, and for the first time, the species had understood how close it came to vanishing entirely. The world remained harsh and unpredictable. Cold winters, predators, and natural disasters would continue to challenge humans, but something fundamental had changed. Survivors had learned that adaptation was not optional. It was essential. The triumph was not in defeating the winter or the beasts outright, but in enduring, in finding ways to survive when all seemed lost. It is staggering to imagine that at one point, the entirety of the human race numbered only a few thousand. From such fragility, the species endured, giving rise to the civilizations, knowledge, and innovations that would follow thousands of years later. Every person alive at that time had carried the weight of humanity on their shoulders, and their survival ensured that the story of humans did not end in that frozen, ash-filled night. 70,000 years ago, humanity almost vanished. And yet, through perseverance, intelligence, and cooperation, our ancestors survived. Their struggle reminds us that even in the face of the unimaginable, life can endure, and that the story of humanity is not only one of survival, but of the extraordinary capacity to overcome.